Welcome to The Lone Cure, the internet corner, where you will learn lifelong lessons in minutes of listening. Today's read is Audacity by Jonathan Chait. So if you like this summary, please consider reading the book itself since it is worth it. And if you like this content, like and subscribe and check our channel for more. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into Jonathan Chait's really remarkable book, Audacity. Our mission with this deep dive is to explore Chait's central argument that the Obama presidency, which, many people perceived as a failure, was actually, well, a period of significant success. He argues Obama achieved his ambitious goals.
Yeah, it really is compelling stuff. Chait makes this strong case that Obama accomplished an enormous amount, really fulfilling those audacious promises he made.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How that perception of failure got so locked in, even among some of his supporters.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to unpack in this deep dive. First, why did that perception take hold? Then we'll dig into the specifics, the actual measurable achievements. Across the big areas, economy, healthcare, climate, foreign policy, we're drawing straight from Chait's arguments, his sources,
Right.
and connecting it all back to what it means for you, the listener, in terms of understanding American politics now.
Okay, so let's start right there with that paradox, because it's really striking. Chait says Obama achieved an enormous amount, but the Republicans, they called their wins a clear repudiation. And maybe even stranger, a lot of Obama supporters felt this resignation to despair. They thought he'd largely failed. That's a huge gap, right?
It's a massive gap. And Chait digs into this Republican side, calling it the myth of repudiation.
Yeah.
He argues it wasn't just, random disagreement. It was a deliberate strategy.
Yeah.
They wanted to destroy Obama's legacy because it changed so much, not because it changed too little.
Huh. Like resistance to other big shifts in history.
Exactly. Think about Lincoln and the slavery ban, or FDR and the New Deal. Fierce, long-lasting opposition precisely because the changes were so profound. It wasn't about minor tweaks.
And it wasn't just the political opposition feeding this narrative. Chait notes even some sympathetic journalists pushed this idea of unfulfilled promise.
Right. People who generally supported him still spread this narrative that Obama was better at the hopey, changey atmospherics, as Chait puts it, than actual governing.
That phrase definitely stuck.
It did. And it just became the conventional wisdom. You almost didn't have to defend it. People just accepted it.
Which brings us to the media's role, maybe focusing on style over substance.
Yeah, Chait uses Chuck Todd's book, The Stranger, as a key example here. The focus in much of the Washington press corps wasn't really on policy results. It was on Obama's political methodology, his constant search for bipartisanship.
So the stimulus package, for instance.
Exactly. It wasn't judged on, did it help save the economy, which was its actual goal. It was judged on, did it achieve bipartisan harmony, which of course it didn't. Same with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Yeah.
The criticism wasn't about whether they stopped the spill, which Chait points out was an impressive feat, technically, but whether Obama sufficiently calmed public anxiety. It's a different metric.
It's like preventing disaster is invisible work. You don't get points for the catastrophe that didn't happen.
That's precisely it. Timothy Geithner made that observation, right? Presidents get credit for responding to disasters, not from keeping them from happening. So, Obama preventing a second Great Depression. Monumental. But in the public mind. A literal non-event. Because the worst didn't occur, it was easy to think it never would have.
Which really speaks to the audacity.
Yeah.
Chait talks about taking big risks for long-term goals, even without the immediate political payoff.
Precisely. And that leads us right into the economy.
Yeah.
Because Obama inherited just an absolute crisis.
Yeah, the scale of the challenge was immense, and Chait stresses Obama's goals were bigger than just stopping the bleeding.
Oh, the feeling then was sheer panic. His advisors talked about this slowly enveloping dread. Christina Romer, his top economist, she had this holy shit moment showing him forecasts. The economy shrinking way faster than anyone thought.
So drastic measures were needed, Keynesian economics.
Right, basic Keynesian idea.
Right.
In a huge downturn, government has to spend. Inject money, create demand, get people working, even if it's just digging holes and filling them back up, metaphorically speaking, anything to stop the downward spiral.
And the stimulus was the big tool. But what's fascinating is how the political ground shifted under Obama's feet. Republicans who'd backed stimulus before
Told to reverse course. It's quite the pivot. Guys like Kevin Hassett, Paul Ryan. They'd supported Keynesian ideas in, milder recessions just years before. But under Obama, suddenly it was bad policy. Chait argues there was a clear partisan motive. Slow down the recovery, make it harder for Obama politically.
And the specific attacks on the stimulus got pretty wild, calling it a wish list, saying Medicaid spending wouldn't help.
Yeah, Karl Rove scoffed at the Medicaid spending, right? Asking how that hires a factory worker. But studies later showed every dollar of that Medicaid spending actually generated more than $1 closer to $2 in economic activity. It created hundreds of thousands of job years. And not just in healthcare or government.
Even the famous resawed the National Mall criticism.
Makes perfect Keynesian sense. In a time of mass unemployment, you pay people to do something, anything to get money circulating.
So, despite the attacks and acknowledging it was maybe smaller than ideally needed because of political compromises,
it was still gigantic compared to past efforts. We're talking hundreds of billions, way bigger than Clinton's stimulus, or even FDR's relative to GDP back then. And crucially, Chait emphasizes it kept over 5 million Americans out of poverty. That's huge.
And beyond the stimulus, there were the other massive interventions, the banks and the auto industry. Those were incredibly risky, too.
Huge risks. The banking system was frozen. Obama's team used these stress tests on the big banks. Basically, prove you're stable or take government help. It was necessary to get lending going again. Then the auto industry. GM, Chrysler, just collapsing. Congress said no to a bailout. Bush gave temporary aid. Obama made the call to take government control, essentially.
Deeply unpopular.
Massively unpopular. 3-to-1 opposition in polls. Obama himself called it a horrible choice, maybe a 51% chance of working. Just slightly better than a coin flip.
The results?
Undeniable. Saved, by Chait's count, over 2 million jobs. Generated hundreds of billions in income for workers. And, importantly, saved taxpayers over $100 billion because the government didn't have to pick up the tab for pensions and health care if those companies went under completely.
Wow.
It worked so well that Mitt Romney, who'd been vehemently against it, later tried this preposterous revision, Chait calls it, claiming he'd actually supported the core idea.
Well,
that tells you something.
And looking longer term, comparing the U.S. recovery to Europe's, there was a real difference in approach, wasn't there?
A huge difference. Obama resisted the expansionary austerity idea that was gripping Europe, this theory that cutting spending would magically boost growth. It didn't work out well for them. By 2014, Chait points out, only the U.S. and Germany, among a dozen countries that had major financial crises, were back to pre-crisis GDP levels.
So austerity didn't work?
Not comparatively. EU unemployment was nearly double the U.S. rate in 2015. The U.S., meanwhile, created more jobs in 2014 than any year since '99. And by 2015, middle-income wages saw their biggest jump since the 60s. Even the poorest saw big gains. Unemployment fell below 6%, way ahead of what Romney had projected in 2012.
Okay, let's shift gears to healthcare. Obama called the old system a humanitarian and economic disaster.
And it really was. The U.S. was the outlier among rich nations. No universal access, spending way more, getting worse results. You had this problem of adverse selection. Only sick people buying insurance drives up costs for everyone. Pre-existing conditions were a nightmare. And get this, 3/4 of medical bankruptcies hit people with insurance. Their plans just weren't enough.
So the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, aimed to fix that. But the opposition was intense, even though, ironically, some core ideas came from conservatives originally.
That's one of the great ironies Chait highlights, the individual mandate.
Yeah.
That thing conservatives hated. It was floated by the Heritage Foundation in the 90s.
Right.
And Mitt Romney implemented a very similar system in Massachusetts' Romney Care. He even initially praised it as a potential national model.
But once Obama adopted those ideas,
They dropped them like hot potatoes,
Yeah.
Paul Ryan, others, complete reversal. The opposition became ferocious. Lawsuits, calling it the broccoli mandate.
I remember that.
The Supreme Court case that let states opt out of Medicaid expansion, which meant Republican states left billions in federal money on the table. And then there were campaigns trying to actively stop people signing up, like burning fake Obamacare cards.
And we absolutely have to mention the healthcare.gov website launch. That was a public relations nightmare.
Oh, it was terrible. Looked like total government failure. It absolutely fueled the Republican arguments for a while. But what Chait details is the incredible turnaround, this frantic scramble behind the scenes, the impressive repair job by Obama's tech team. They got it working within weeks.
So despite that rocky start and the relentless political attacks, did it actually work? What were the results?
The results were really significant and measurable. The uninsured rate for working-age adults fell from over 22% down to below 13%. That's 20 million more people with insurance.
Wow, 20 million.
Yeah. Gallup polls confirmed a too-big drop. And here's something interesting. People surveyed were actually more satisfied with the plans they got on the ECA exchanges than people with traditional job-based insurance.
Really?
Yeah. And premiums initially came in lower than predicted. Plus, the big goal, bending the curve on healthcare costs. Kate cites figures showing the healthcare system spent trillions with a T, Liz, between 2014 and 2019 than projected before the ACA.
Trillions? How?
Through various mechanisms in the law aimed at efficiency. Things like fewer hospital-acquired infections, fewer readmissions. Atul Gawande went back to McAllen, Texas, a place famous for high costs, and found savings on an unprecedented scale.
So politically, even though Republicans kept calling it a disaster, the law created its own reality.
Exactly. It created this constituency of 20 million people who now had insurance. That makes a full repeal politically almost impossible. Even critics like Lamar Alexander eventually acknowledged you couldn't just rip it away. It's embedded now.
Okay, moving to another huge, almost intractable problem, climate change. Chait calls it a problem practically designed not to solve politically.
And he's right. The costs are long-term, the benefits diffuse. You've got powerful fossil fuel lobbies. You've got the global collective action problem. Who pays? Especially between rich and poor nations. Past efforts like Kyoto, Copenhagen, they mostly failed.
So how did Obama approach it differently?
Multi-pronged. Domestically, it started with the stimulus again. People forget, but it had $90 billion in green energy subsidies and tax credits. That led to huge boosts. Wind power hit its 2030 goal back in 2010. Solar capacity exploded, increased over 30 times during his presidency. He also created ARPAE, modeled on the agency that created the internet, to fund cutting-edge energy tech.
But what about Solyndra? That became the symbol of failure for critics.
Right, but Chait argues Solyndra was the exception, not the rule. It got all the headlines, but only about 2% of the $34 billion in loan money defaulted. The overall program basically broke even for taxpayers, and it fostered real innovation.
So subsidies were one part. What else?
Regulations. Using the existing Clean Air Act, his administration rolled out a sweeping array of rules. Tightened fuel efficiency standards for cars, aiming for over 54 miles per gallon by 2025. Cleaner gasoline standards, equivalent to taking 33 million cars off the road. Energy efficiency rules for buildings, appliances.
And the big one targeting power plants, the Clean Power Plan.
That was a huge regulatory lift. Power plants are, 40% of U.S. emissions? The plan set state-specific targets to cut emissions significantly by 2030. And crucially, they did it using existing Clean Air Act authorities, so they didn't need Congress, which was obviously never going to pass it. Even some former Republican EPA heads praised its flexibility.
So that's domestic. But climate is global. What about internationally, especially China?
This is where Obama's diplomacy really shone, according to Chait. The U.S.-China relationship was critical. Conservatives kept saying China would never cut emissions, but Obama engaged them directly. China had its own reasons. Terrible smog, wanting global leadership. They made joint pledges on things like hydrofluorocarbons. China pledged its emissions would peak by 2030, much earlier than expected, and their actual carbon intensity dropped significantly.
And this paved the way for the Paris Agreement.
Exactly. That U.S.-China collaboration was the key breakthrough. It led to Paris, the first global agreement where nearly 200 countries committed to reducing emissions. The structure was clever, bottom-up, countries set their own targets. That made it possible to get everyone on board. Chait credits Obama's singular role in pushing it through despite intense domestic opposition.
So did all this actually change the energy landscape? Is it irreversible?
Chait argues yes. The economic calculus fundamentally shifted. Solar is now cheaper than fossil fuels in many places. Wind is competitive. Hundreds of U.S. coal plants closed. His point is this massive progress happened because of government action subsidies, regulations, diplomacy driving innovation and changing the market.
Okay, let's turn to foreign policy. Always complex and definitely seen as a mixed bag during Obama's time.
Yeah, and Chait frames Obama's approach as a strategic shift. His willingness to talk to adversaries, even rogue states like Iran or Cuba, without preconditions.
Which critics called naive.
Right. Hillary Clinton, John McCain,
Yeah.
they criticized it. But Obama's view, as Chait explains, was that not talking was pointless. Dialogue, even with enemies, could strengthen America's hand.
The Middle East interventions, though, Libya and Syria, those remain really controversial.
Extremely difficult situations. In Libya, Obama authorized bombing to prevent a massacre by Gaddafi. It led to Gaddafi's fall, but Chait concedes there was a failure in post-intervention planning, leading to instability. Syria was the opposite approach. Restraint, trying to avoid another Iraq-style entanglement. But the result was horrific humanitarian suffering and the rise of ISIS. The red line comment clearly backfired and damaged credibility.
It sounds like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Pretty much. Chait quotes a former advisor, Philip Gordon, basically saying, intervene and occupy Iraq, disaster. Intervene but don't occupy Libya, disaster. Don't intervene Syria, disaster. The common thread wasn't Obama's specific choice, but the deep instability of the region itself.
What about handling Russia?
When Russia did its stealth invasion of Crimea, Obama opted against military confrontation, which past presidents also avoided in Russia's sphere. Instead, he worked through the UN, got a resolution condemning Russia, and coordinated tough economic sanctions with Europe. Chait argues these sanctions hit Russia hard, throwing their economy into recession. It showed power doesn't only mean military force.
And the Cuba opening fits that pattern, too.
Exactly. Normalizing relations after decades of stalemate, conservatives hated it, called it a concession, but Chait argues it boosted U.S. credibility, especially in Latin America. And ironically, even some Republicans ended up visiting Cuba and calling for an end to the embargo afterwards.
Then there's the Iran nuclear deal. Hugely controversial, but Chait presents it as a major achievement.
A critical one, given the stakes. When Obama took office, Iran was getting dangerously close to having enough material for a bomb. They had thousands of centrifuges spinning. Obama used this dual-track approach Chait describes, offer negotiations, but simultaneously build incredibly strong international sanctions. He even got Russia and China on board with sanctions, which is unprecedented.
And the deal itself.
Iran gave up the vast majority of its centrifuges and enriched uranium. They agreed to intrusive inspections. By 2016, international monitors confirmed Iran was complying. Even Israel's former defense minister, Moshe Yaalon, acknowledged it removed the immediate existential threat. Chait also highlights the innovative UN sanctions mechanism they'd automatically snap back unless the Security Council voted to keep them suspended. That was a clever way to ensure enforcement.
It seems like for both Iran and Paris, Obama had to use executive powers because Congress wouldn't act.
That's a really important point Chait makes. Faced with total gridlock and hostility from Congress, Obama found ways to act unilaterally where he could, waiving sanctions for Iran, using EPA authority for climate rules. It showed a different way to govern when the traditional legislative path was blocked.
Okay, so let's pull it all together. Looking at the whole picture, Chait's arguing for a presidency that achieved a lot more than it got credit for and fundamentally changed things.
Absolutely. And it's not just the big four areas. Chait touches on other things, too. Education reform, for instance. Race to the top, tucked into the stimulus bill. It used competitive grants, a relatively small amount of money, to push dozens of states into making big policy changes on things like teacher effectiveness and charter schools.
And student loans.
Yeah, big reform there, too. Kicked private lenders out of the federal student loan program, saving something like $61 billion. Plus, tax changes that made the system more progressive, shifting burdens off the poor and middle class.
And Dodd-Frank for financial regulation. That always seemed incredibly complicated.
It was complicated, but the impact was profound, Chait argues. It created regulated exchanges for derivatives, limited risky trading by banks with the Volcker rule, which led big banks to actually shut down proprietary trading desks. And crucially, it created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. That agency has gone after banks and lenders for scams, recovering billions for consumers. So despite criticism it was a bailout bill, Chait says it genuinely altered the landscape of finance.
And underneath all this policy, Chait discusses the cultural and political shifts, especially around race.
Yeah, he argues Obama's presidency itself intensified the focus on race in politics. It created this poisonous dynamic, he calls it, where liberals suspected racism behind all opposition and conservatives felt constantly falsely accused. Race became a much stronger predictor of views on things like healthcare than it had been before. Obama's election, Chait suggests, kind of finalized this long-term shift in the parties. Republicans consolidating white working-class voters, Democrats becoming the party of minorities and racially liberal whites.
And that coalition Obama built.
That emerging Democratic coalition, as Chait describes it, urban, educated, diverse, young. It's what gave Obama his wins. And it represents the future demographic trends, contrasting with the Republican strategy of focusing on a shrinking base. What's also interesting is Chait's point that many of Obama's policies weren't radically left-wing. They often borrowed from older, moderate Republican ideas that the party itself had abandoned, like Romney Care for the ACA or Nixon's EPA framework for climate action.
So a pragmatic approach.
Yeah, Chait portrays Obama's vision as humane, pragmatic, open to evidence and science, and welcoming to outsiders. A different model of governance.
So wrapping this up, Chait's core argument in Audacity is that we fundamentally misjudged the Obama presidency in real time. The perception, left or right, didn't match the reality of significant hard-won achievements, often because they were complex, involved compromise, or maybe most subtly, because they prevented disasters we never saw.
Exactly. And Chait leaves us with this historical perspective. He notes that American progressives often experience their biggest victories as failures in the moment. Think about emancipation. Social Security initially seen by many supporters as sellouts or compromises. It's only later, with time and often further incremental changes, that they gain that sheen of idealistic grandeur. He uses the analogy of the Truman balcony on the White House.
Ah, right.
Yeah, heavily criticized when it was built, seen as ruining the architecture. Now it's just
Right.
part of the White House. Accepted, even cherished. A symbol of how something controversial can become normalized and valued. So the question this deep dive leaves for you, the listener, is this. How does understanding this disconnect between perception and reality during the Obama years change how we evaluate leaders today? How do we recognize incremental, sometimes hidden, progress in real time? And what lessons does Chait's analysis offer for navigating the political landscape now, especially when trying to define what success actually looks like in policy and politics?